Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence. We're a nonprofit membership organization dedicated to helping you streamline your RFP process through better education, smarter strategies, and more transparency. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive training, discounts to our virtual and in-person events, and the chance to connect with other procurement professionals throughout the year. And if you're planning a professional event or conference, don't forget our CPE Speakers Bureau is available to speak at regional and national gatherings. Now let's get into today's session of Ask the RFP Doctor, where one of our expert RFP doctors will show you how to take on real-world challenges in procurement and supply chain management and break them down into practical strategies you can use right away.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So for today, we're talking about how to handle surprises during negotiations. Sometimes we have a firm that we want to hire, we think everything's good, we bring them forward to negotiate, and all of a sudden we realize that there is a misunderstanding or something wrong about that process. And so today is specifically going to focus on how to deal with those different situations. These could be unexpected gaps in the project requirements or perhaps late discoveries during negotiations that completely derail the whole thing. And we'll also look at a real-world example of how missing critical details, whether it's scope, budget, or something else, can carry major challenges on the project. So that's our focus here today is just like my wife, who does not like surprises, we don't like surprises on our projects, and so we're going to try to avoid some of that here today. So four main things we're going to go through is we're going to kind of reframe our thinking about the negotiation process. What is a surprise? What do I mean by that? And then we have a real example that happened, and we'll talk about some of the lessons learned from that, and I'll have a quick recap of what we talked about. Okay, so just to set the stage here for what we're talking about is that we have our, just for our typical procurement process, we have the suppliers' proposals that come in. So those come in, you determine if they're responsive, they may have a written reevaluation, we may do interviews and presentations, and then at some point we'll identify one or maybe more firms and invite them into the event, into the negotiation phase. And so this is that phase we're talking about right here at the end is what we're going to focus on for our discussion here today, right? Now, one thing I want to keep in mind here is that there are two differences between the clarification phase or the detailed planning, which is what this is and what we'll talk about most today. And there's also the legal terms and conditions, other legal type of things that we're also going to work on here. Our advice is to make sure and run these two streams of activities at the same time. So have a legal review, do all the terms and conditions, insurance, whatever details you need to do from that standpoint. At the same time, you're clarifying and going through the detailed planning for the project. If you do this at the same time, the net benefit is not losing time on the overall project. So keep this in mind. I've seen projects before, we'll go through detailed planning, and then we start having the lawyer's review. And that's just, it takes up so much more time, and that's not what we would recommend. Do them at the same time, gets a better outcome, right? That's where we should focus here for our procurement teams and our project teams is this clarification and detailed planning. Now, one thing, we had a RFP doctor November of last year that talked about how do we do rethinking contract negotiations. And, there's whole classes out there about how to get your vendors to do more, how to kind of squeeze them part of the negotiation process. And a whole discussion, which is found at that YouTube link here, is going through and talking about what that is here. A summary of that recording at the discussion was this here, is that we recommend a detailed process and to go through and talk about what those are. And as Tim points out, there are certainly details that might require legal review, and that's certainly a good thing to do here. But the essence of the operations of how we're delivering the project is where this is so critical when we think about what our project actually is. Okay, as part of that video, we said that an excellent clarification or negotiation process should look like this: 3 major steps. We notify the vendors, we have a kickoff meeting, we go through and clarify as to what they're going to propose, and finally we have a final meeting that summarizes everything we talked about as part of this clarification negotiation phase. And then we finally get to award. So let's go through each of these steps here just to kind of level set what we're talking about, and then we'll go through and look at one of our examples. Okay, the first thing here as part of this the notification phase is we have to notify and coach the vendor as to what this process is. What I want to convey to you folks is that this is not a normal pre-planning negotiation phase, and your vendors have to recognize that. The main thing that the vendors need to recognize is that this is their time to clarify and understand what they should do. Now, as part of our group with Simplar, we do this significantly with procurement organizations, project teams, as we help them go through this clarification process. And it's interesting is that this whole idea of notifications, kickoff meeting, letting the vendor run this whole phase, and then having the award at the end, that wasn't our idea. What we found, though, is that when we talk with really high-performing vendors and contractors that were truly experts, this is exactly what they do. They said, we need a period of time before we sign the contract and make the award to clarify and understand what the plan is. We said, great, sounds good. And this is what the results of that, right? So as part of the notification, again, tell the vendors that this is different from most organizations. You're going to put that right in the RFP. But really, a big part of what you'll do in procurement is to coach the vendor, coach the winner as to how this process looks. And certainly, this is easier said than done, but that's the main thing to do as part of this negotiation process, this notification process. The second part of this here is a kickoff meeting. And what we're going to do here is to have a meeting where the vendor will come in and lay out, here's what we think the project is. Now, folks, this might seem like a minor detail, but when you have this kickoff meeting, it's super important that the vendor does the talking. It's super important that the vendor sets the agenda, and they're the ones that give the presentation as to what they expect to do on the project. The more you can put off to the vendor to lead and execute and manage this process, the better the outcome will be. And that's what makes this so different. The vendors many times are used to coming in, having been told, here's what we need you all to do. And certainly there's things that you as an owner, as a procurement team will need them to do, but you want the vendor to take the lead and go through this process. So the vendors are going to come in, they're going to have an agenda, they're going to have a structure as to what they're going to done, and they're going to lay out basically a list of action items that everybody's going to go through and deliver as part of that. Part of this process will be to develop what we call the clarification or partnering document, and that essentially focuses on 5 things. The cost. So if you are on like a construction job, that's pretty simple, straightforward. Here's the total cost. If it's alternate delivery like design build, you'd have a lot more details about what that looks like. If it's a software or a negotiation type project, you will have a lot more financial details that you need to go through as part of what this cost structure looks like. Schedule, expectations, risk plan, documentation, or these are all the 5 major things we're going to get done as part of this clarification process. I had a vendor once describe that they think of the risk plan as kind of like their game plan or their guidebook for the project. And what essentially going to do here is look at what are the major things that could go wrong with this project and how are we going to minimize that? Or if something does come up, what's our plan to mitigate those issues? It's literally a guidebook or a game plan, right? Think of like football. You have a game plan ahead of time, and then you execute the project. And when things come up, you already know what you're going to do with that, right? That's essentially what this is here, right? Our role as CPE is that you can never have a plan on a blank whiteboard. You actually have to literally draw out and explain, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do that, right? The other thing here too, just to, as a phrase is beat a dead horse, is let the vendor give their recommendation first. Ask the vendor, okay, what's your plan for the project? How would you lay this out? What concerns do you have? The more the vendor can talk, the more the vendor can take initiative, the better the outcome's going to be. And then finally, at the end of that, you'll have your final meeting. What I like to call this is your orange juice and donuts meeting, meaning the vendors will come in, they're going to summarize everything they talked about over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever number of weeks it might be here, and summarize, here's the key things that we're going to be discussing as part of this here. When you get to this final meeting here, there should be no surprises. If something surprising comes up or something that folks hadn't thought about comes up, then you need to have another meeting. Nothing surprising should come up at this final meeting, because if not, it's going to cause us all sorts of issues. Everybody's happy, we're all jovial, we're ready to go, we make the award, and we move forward here, right? And again, as I mentioned, we recommend to do in parallel contract negotiations, legal terms and conditions, as you're doing all these other activities with this year. Okay, all right, saves time, and that's the best way to do that. Okay. So that's a summary of what we talked about last November. Maybe more than a summary here, but go through, watch that video. I put a link in the chat box because there's a lot of really good details that can summarize what that actually is. We actually have a class at NASPO that talks about how to negotiate more effectively, and we spend a whole hour and a half, 2 hours talking about that, and that would certainly be a benefit in the future. Okay. So in spite of our best efforts, and in spite of having a really fantastic proposal evaluation process, really great interviews, we can still get surprises, right? And at Simplar, our team, we have seen it all. I mean, truly, we've seen so many different things, and surprises are not ideal, and it does happen, right? So when we talk about surprise, what this is here is that, maybe we discovered an unexpected gap in the scope. Maybe the client realized, or the vendor realized, hey, wait a second, you guys don't have this in there. You have to do that. Maybe the vendor assumed that the client was going to provide some sort of service or space or whatever for the project, and they realized, oh no, they actually don't have that. That's a big deal, right? Another major difference could be is, honestly, folks, vendors are not perfect. We have seen projects, not a lot, but we've seen a couple projects where the vendors realize that they missed something in their proposal. And we can discuss that significantly. And that's, honestly, folks, that's why the reason that we generally don't recommend a bid bond in that case here, right? If you realize that the vendors have missed something, normally what you would do is you have a bid bond, which means they get penalized, there's fees, there's all sorts of things that happen with that. Honestly, what I would rather have is a vendor be totally honest and say, hey, I missed this part of the scope, my price doesn't reflect that, and it's not a win for our company. Now, I, as an owner, I would be frustrated by that, certainly, but I would rather know about it and go with somebody else and have a vendor that say, we're just going to make it up, we'll eat the cost, because that turns into a lose-lose over time, right? And that's why bid bonds, we generally don't recommend doing that for all those different reasons, right? So surprise is the vendor misses something, or maybe something changes between the RFP and the contract signing. So in that period of time, a month or two or more, there might be force majeure or something that happens that changes the fundamental conditions of what that project is, right? So these are all examples or classifications of major surprises that you might see on your project. Now, I would say that our team, we're not pessimists, right? We try to be optimistic, and we have found that to be a pretty good approach here, because many times when these surprises are found, it's not usually due to a gotcha or a malfeasance on behalf of the vendor. It's really not somebody trying to pull a fast one, and we happen to catch them. Most often, more than not, it's a true discovery of some unknown condition that is going to materially affect the overall delivery of the project. The reason why you found it is because literally we're doing the clarification process correctly, right? Because we're doing a good job means we're actually more likely to find what's transpiring on the project. We review more details, we confirm what's in scope and what's out of scope, how to achieve the scope, plan who's responsible and for what on the actual project here. So the reason why we find these surprises here is not because people are trying to hide stuff, but because we're actually doing things correctly. If you find yourself going through a clarification phase and something comes up we didn't expect, I wouldn't necessarily think that's a bad thing. That's literally the process working. Now, that said here, if you get through the clarification process and there's no major surprises, everybody's totally happy, I don't think you should intentionally try to find something, right? If there's nothing there and they really have a good plan and your team wrote a really good scope, then yeah, it's totally reasonable that may not happen. But yeah, it's not necessarily into the story here. Okay, let's go through an actual example because it's so interesting of what to do. Now we have lots of examples, but this one is certainly one of the more fun ones that we saw here. So for our friends in Canada, Shane and Tim and other folks, this actually took place in Edmonton, Alberta. So we have worked in Canada many times, many projects over the years. So we've been there in the winter. It's funny, this is an aside, but a lot of projects we worked on in the past in Canada have been like construction. And Shane, when do we do most procurement for construction? It's in wintertime. So just just the nature of our work supporting these procurements, we're up there in January and February, and it's cold and everything else. But that's fine, right? Anyhow, $30 million laboratory, Edmonton, Alberta. This was going to be delivered with design build delivery method. And what is actually a university there. They were building a cyclotron particle accelerator. And I don't know exactly what that is, but basically what it does is it produces these radiopharmaceuticals for cancer treatment. It's this big giant machine, all this equipment that produces research and test and equipment to actually test different types of cancer treatment. So it's a big laboratory, hugely beneficial, right? So it's a special equipment. These are how they make cancer drugs. This is a level 4 laboratory, so big deal. And at the time, this laboratory was tied to work that's going on in the United States as well. So they were the US and Canada for this particular research were partnering together. And so there's many eyeballs, super stressful, many people watching this. And it was a big deal, right? So it's again, big laboratory, lots of scheduled deadlines and major grants tied to this facility being delivered. So you can just imagine the stress on everybody involved in this project to do this volume, right? So this is a large cover project. The current conditions where they're going to build this project is actually on the Balmoral Curling Club. So for curling, anybody that's, I don't know, I was talking to Brian. Brian, I prepped for this. He said curling is the second best Winter Olympic sport. Now, if you're talking to Brian, he would say the #1 Olympic sport is what? Is hockey. But I personally, I love curling. I've never played it myself, but watching online or on the TV is just great. So anyways, this we're going to build it here. They actually took the curling club and they kicked them out to build the new facility. They're going to give them a different site, so they're going to get upgraded. But here's it's not exactly nice. The starting point here is just a picture of curling on ice. And of course, Brian would say hockey is better, but we digress. That's curling, and thus our code here for today. Okay, so what actually happened on the project? Well, something happens on many design build projects is the development of what are called bridging documents. A bridging document is meant to go from we have an idea about what this project is to a little bit more details about this design. So they hired a specialty design consultant that's going to take these documents and bring them to about 15% design complete. And these bridging documents make it an exponentially easier process for the contractors or the design builders to put together a plan and the risk and the cost. Just having a little bit more information is beneficial for them to actually be able to do this on the project here. So here's the plans. This is it's a concrete vault that the particle accelerator is inside of. This is the bridging documents that kind of laid out high level. Here's what this is going to look like. It's kind of hard to look at this drawing, but here's an actual picture inside of the cyclotron. So all this equipment, you can see here, it's again super complex. The mechanical and plumbing systems are the most complicated part of all that. And again, that's why that 15% bridging document was so beneficial. Brian was actually, he was here on site for this particular picture. He took this picture. What this is here on the right-hand side, this is a concrete wall. And this is a door that will actually slide in front of here. The accelerator is inside this opening right here. So this will slide back and forth. This is a 3 meters thick, or for our American friends, 15 feet thick. So it's a big door. Here's some more pictures of different equipment. All this stuff was spec'd out as part of those bridging documents. So again, super important. And you can see here why they actually had to do this here. Now, when they go through and they have these bridging documents, the design was used at the basis of competition inside of the RFP. In other words, that was basically the scope of work, right? That's why, again, that was so important that what we're going to compete on, it may not be totally accurate or represent all the details here. When you select the vendors, that's how we're selecting them based on their plan, based on this 15% complete of what this overall scope is, right? So that's what we did here and how we looked at them. So that's what the project was. We got the negotiation phase. We recommended a detailed specific process. That's one of the questions here for CEUs is follow a recommended process for clarification. And that's what we did here, right? So we got going here. There's so many details to coordinate. We invited the winner. We told them what this is. We trained them up ahead of time. We get to the kickoff meeting, and lo and behold, before the meeting, the vendors called us. So we're like, third-party consultants. We're just, helping out the university. The contractor called us and said, "Hey, surprise, um, we've got a little issue." And I remember the call specifically, and they said, "Okay, what's going on here?" And they said, "Well, in the bridging documents, which you include inside the RFP, were not right. And what we found, this is all the contractor telling us about this. They said, what we found here is that the dimensions of the building in the bridging documents are too short by 4.5 meters, or about 15 feet on the building footprint. So it's too small by 15 feet." And they said that has a big impact because when you think about the overall size of the building, it's short by about 2,000 square feet. And they said, this is a big deal. This is a major oops. And they reached out to us and said, hey, this is going on here because that affects the mechanical sizing, it affects where everything's going to be placed at, it affects, all sorts of other things they're going to think about. But this project here is what we're finding. So they told us all this. They're calling us, not the university. They called us and said, here's what we found about this. And so what would you do? Let's say that you're on this project, you're going through your clarification phase, you've already got all this laid out here. The vendor reaches out to you and say, hey, we got this problem. What do we do about it? So let's walk through the example. Here's what the vendor asked, and this is the most interesting part of the entire project. The vendor asked us, not the university, they said to us, do we tell the client now, or do we wait until the contract is signed? That was the question. They said to you, Simplar guys, do you think we should tell the client now or wait until the contract's signed? So what say you, right? What do we do about this? Now, it was interesting, as we thought about this situation here, is ask yourselves for a minute, is why would a contractor ask us, do we tell the client now or do we wait till after the contract? Why would somebody ask that type of question? And if you think about it, in our opinion, I think the reason why people, in fact, a lot of people think about this, is the reason why they think about that they have been burned so many times on past projects, they find it's a benefit to withhold that information until they have that contract in place. On this advanced planning clarification process, that's not the intent at all. The more we know about front, the more we can actually do about it and deal with it and not be surprised once we actually start construction, right? Totally interesting. Very interesting question, right? So our advice to the contractor, to the design build team was you should 10,000% tell the owner immediately, right? But don't go to them with a problem. You have to bring a solution, right? If your vendors find a problem and they go to you and say, hey, we have this problem, what do you want us to do about it? Folks, that is the wrong question your vendor should be asking. What they should say is, hey, we have this problem, and here's 3 ways we think we can deal with that. That's how we deal with that. If somebody comes to you with no solution, that's not good, right? So that's what we recommended to the vendor. The vendor's initial reaction, what do you think they said? They said, well, we don't have a solution. This is a game-changing discovery. And so we're looking at this. They said, we don't know what to do about this. This is a big deal. And so what say you? Again, right? Really, what do you do here? So they said, we don't have a solution. This is a game-changing discovery. Our response to the vendor was, what's the first thing you need? What do you need to be able to figure this out? The vendor said, we need more time. We said, great, not a problem. We go back to the owner. The vendor notified the client in writing, told them, here's the issue. They walk through the drawings. It's too wide in north-south direction. We need more time. We need extra space to figure this out. The vendor recommended to the client is, we don't want to sign a contract until we figure this out. Mind blown. The owner at this time had never in their entire existence had a vendor come to them and say, we know you're your favorite. We have this issue. We don't want a contract. We need time to pre-plan all this out, right? I mean, the whole thing was just super interesting, right? So they went through the executives, they got approvals, they signed off on everything. This is the beauty of an effective clarification. When you get these surprises, this is exactly what you want to have happen here, right? So they went through, and what it turns out here is that the vendor actually found more issues in these design documents. It's not that it was a 15% complete document and they just needed the rest of that 85%. They found fundamental issues that were just flat out wrong inside that 15%. So there was all sorts of issues with that. There's many more, and as the phrase goes, when it rains, it pours, and that's what I found out about this project, right? So the vendor asked for 1 more month for that clarification process to go through and figure out this. Their logic was, let's get our hand around this, let's get a plan together, and let's sign a contract that reflects reality. A contract that reflects the actual conditions or needs of the project is far better than just rushing to the project, sign the agreement, and move on, and then all of a sudden, day one, oh, surprise, right? We don't want that, right? So that's what they did. It went great. The vendor uh, went from the vendor asking questions to just signing the contract, to actually figuring out voluntarily delaying their contract signing to get all this sorted out, right? It was truly incredible, and it was really quite impressive. Project finished up, no delays, no cost increases. This is Hugh Warren. He was the executive director of operations and maintenance at the time. Look how happy he is. He's so happy, right? They did an audit with this particular project for reasons I'll explain in a minute here, but they estimated that because the vendor brought it up ahead of time and found this out, they saved about 14 to 18 months on schedule and about $8 to $12 million in cost, right? So again, folks, this was not an easy project. There's all sorts of other issues, very complicated, but the net result of this is that everybody was happier, right? Now, the tricky aspects of Crystal, excellent question. And Crystal's question is, well, why not just rebid the thing? Great question here. Part of the reason, that's literally my next slide here, is that as part of this process, emotions can run high during these negotiations. And Crystal, I am going to answer your questions. Why not rebid it? We are going to get to that, right? The first thing here is that, when you have a surprise during negotiation, emotions do run high, right? You're expecting to sign a contract, not get delayed by another month, right? So that's in an emotional standpoint, that's just the reality of what we see here, right? The second thing here is, as Crystal pointed out, is the surprise is big enough, do you need to cancel and recompete? So in that situation, what we did here is we immediately got the lawyers involved for the university. They said, you can proceed here with this vendor. They felt comfortable doing that. It was an unknown condition, and there's more details we're not going to go in here, but they said, the lawyer team said, you can do that, right? Now, we have seen projects, especially on software, that we've been involved with where there's some massive discovery. There's one I was thinking of years ago, is for basically a DMV system at a state institution, and they found the scope was off by like 50%. It was going to be tens of millions of dollars of changes to deal with this issue. That particular project, they canceled the whole thing, recompete, and it was just too far off from what the reality is. But in this case here, on this project, the lawyers felt comfortable going forward here, right? The third thing here about the surprises is that, can you change the scope in the contract? Again, this depends on the scale and of this particular situation. In nearly every RFP, you have the ability to clarify what that scope means, right? So this is clarification. We're not asking the vendor to do something new. We're really clarifying what their intent is for the particular project, right? But you can't always have a material change to the scope, right? Typically supposed to have some sort of scope in the RFP. Again, if you're doing like an invitation to negotiate or an ITN, there's leverage there. But in this particular process, the reason why they were able to go forward is that the scope wasn't that well developed, and it really wasn't a material change because, again, there wasn't a lot of scope to change in the first place. Yeah, I think that's why the lawyers were comfortable with that. Number 4 here is, again, don't let the clarification process get dropped. If you find yourself in a very difficult project, the more you can stick to the process, use that structured approach, that will be a far better outcome, right? So your role here, my recommendation in procurement, is these are the 4 major things that you can do to help facilitate this process. It is not procurement's role to be subject matter experts or technical experts about what the project is. But what we can do in procurement is to enforce the rules of the process. We can enforce using this structured approach to clarify things and make sure our project teams do that. That's the value that we as procurement can add. Now, folks, I would tell you that I've seen a number of times where you go through the procurement process, and if you've watched our RFP doctors, you've probably got a really good RFP, you've got a really good solicitation, your evaluation approach, your interviews, all that has gone well. The number of times we have seen teams, client teams, that just want to immediately rush to signing a contract and get going is unbelievable. Your value as procurement, frankly, folks, I think sometimes is be a stick in the mud. And stick in the mud in the sense that we need to adhere to this process. Because when you do that, it helps identify concerns and risks and surprises that otherwise we would not have known about, right? This is what we can do in procurement. So in summary here, our recommendation is to clarify and plan during negotiations and stick to a proven process. That's what we recommend. Surprises do happen. They happen a lot. It's a normal thing to happen. Certainly some are larger than others. And if you are seeing a material change, and as Crystal pointed out, and others, and you may need to stop the project and recompete, that's fine. That's probably, avoids risk and protest and all sorts of things here. But depending on what the project is here, is that it's good to know what these things are and keep calm and work it together, right? Leverage the vendor's expertise. If you find yourself in a situation where something has been found, something that we did not expect, the vendors are your first place to identify the best way to deal with this, because that's literally why we're hiring them. The reason why we hire vendors, especially using the RFP process, is because we ourselves don't have the capability or the expertise to do what needs to be done. So we hire somebody who is an expert that has seen this before that can deliver this out and actually get this done here. So a couple of reminders here for the process. We do have the recordings on the website. So if you go to the cpe.org/RFP Doctor, you can go through and get recordings of past projects. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. You can certainly attend that, and I'll put a link in there. So if you want to go to all the recordings, just go to the website. You can get access to all that. We have upcoming free classes with NASPO. We have it one more time this year, our Better RFPs, Better Projects. I think several of you have attended that in the past. Our next one will be in August. It's on Procurement U. That is free to sign up, 10 credit hours. So we'd love to see you all as part of it if you've not done that before. We also have another one, another presentation is a grade scoring matrix. That'll be in October. And we're also doing effective evaluations and negotiations. That's that third part here I talked about. That's also be in October. So definitely go to NASPO Procurement U, sign up for that. And we would love to have you there as part of that. And I will put a link into that in the chat box. And we'd love to have you there for that. The other thing we've also done too as CPs, we've started doing regular surveys, procurement checkup surveys. You all have likely received emails. We're going to be blasting out another one here soon. These are called procurement currents. If you've not seen that, be keeping a lookout. We're going to send out new ones here. We're actually going to summarize a lot of these results at NASPO, the webinar we're having on August 13th. So if you want to sign up for that, you can go to NASPO's website, sign up for that, and we have our procurement currents event. I will drop that into chat box here. I would love for you all to sign up for that, so you can register for procurements August 13th. That's like an economic what's going on out there, and that'll be fun. Man, look at all the stuff we got going on. Another event we have here is July 23rd at NASPO Reach. Ken and Brian from our team are doing a workshop about AI. I think the session is all filled up. I know last time I checked, there was north of 100 people. I think somewhere around there, 75 to 100 people. So if you want to sign up for that, it'll be a Wednesday, July 23rd. You can sign up for that. And the other event we'll have at NASPO Reach is on July 24th, Scopes of Work. Brian's going to talk about that. So be sure to check all that out. Here's a summary of all our upcoming activities, lots going on. And be sure to join up, be there or be square. So, okay, folks. Well, that's the main part of our discussion here today. We'll kind of open it up to office hours. What do y'all got? Any questions? What's kind of the biggest surprise you've seen? And what have you done? Have you kind of dealt with that? Or any other thoughts, comments, feedback, anything else from anybody? All right, Michael's question is, how do you pivot on budgets when you run into changes unexpected in this fashion? Oh man, Michael, that's $1 million question there, right? That's a great question. So there's a couple ways to deal with this. The first thing part of this here is that if you just realize you have a situation that's going to cost more money, um, you either need to get more money from the board that approves that, or you need to reduce scope on the project. So on this particular project, the Alberta one, it was so early on in the project that they had a rough number, but it wasn't set, and so they were able to work through that. That's a great question for your vendors too. That if you have a fixed amount of money and something surprising comes up, then I would ask them, hey, this is all the money we have available. What do you do about that? Now, if you, in the course of a project, if you truly come across unforeseen conditions that you need to deal with, I mean, that's how you normally deal with that in any other type of project. And if it's unforeseen conditions, us as an owner, and we've got to have contingencies in place to pay for those different projects. So I would definitely encourage you to think about that, but it's not easy, Michael, and that's how we have to deal with that. Now, Sharon wants to know if the vendor waited until the contract was signed, hoping there would be a change order. That can happen. So on some projects we've seen before where the vendor goes through, they realize there's an issue. What we have done that due to legal constraints is that they can't change the scope prior to the contract being signed. And that's kind of goes to Chris's question earlier is about changing the scope of that. What we have done in the past, we do what's called a planned change order. So if during that clarification process, we realize that there's some surprise, here's how we deal with it, then we'll actually put all together documentation for a change order. We sign the contract, and day one, we sign the change order. That's one way to deal with that. Now, if the contractor waits until after they got a contract in place and to tell you, hey, by the way, we found this issue, that's something we could have found ahead of time. That's really, I think that's a more of an indicator that our clarification process and our procurement process wasn't done very effectively. Now, there's truly unforeseen conditions. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that where the vendors know about something and they don't tell anybody about it. We did another research study about how often vendors know about information and don't tell it. And this is focused on heavy civil projects. And we found in this research study, 80%, I think it was about 82% of the time, the vendors are aware of problems, but they don't tell owners about it. In that same study, we asked owners, what percent of the time do the vendors tell you about issues? And they said it's like 8% of the time. So the last part of our research study for that was, why don't vendors tell owners about what this is, about these issues they find? The number one reason is that they're worried that if a vendor has a good idea about a problem, they'll take that idea and give it to the low bidder. So in other words, they're worried about their expertise being given to other people, not creating a fair environment. So a roundabout way to answer Sharon's question here is that if we convince our vendor partners that we're truly trying to be a client of choice, that we're truly trying to have a better experience, a better outcome, the vendors are far more likely to be transparent and honest in those situations. And we have seen that time and time again here that the value of being fair and open in a procurement process is certainly a fantastic way to deal with some of that stuff, right? Great question, Sharon. Thank you. Crystal says that the hard part of my end is that the department does their own negotiation alone and comes to us only if something goes wrong, right? It's like, well, tell me, why don't you tell me about this? Yes, Chris, I totally get that, right? Part of that, our role in procurement, and I mean, as procurement, it's like preaching to the choir, right? I mean, you all know the struggles and challenges you deal with here, but I think one thing we can do as procurement is to position ourselves as professionals whose main job is to protect the public value. And the way we protect the public value is not by being cheap, but by finding vendors that are true experts. That's what we do in procurement. Our job titles, we should change our job titles to be like expert finder. That's what I do. I am an expert finder, right? I'm a chief expert consultant. I find experts. That's what we do in procurement. And many times, a lot of folks think procurement as, just go shopping. Go shopping, find the cheapest, and that's how we bring value to our organizations, right? By showing the amount of money we save here. And certainly saving money, I'm not saying saving money is not a bad thing, but the real value we can bring to our relations is to bring somebody that knows what they're doing, and we have none of the pain and suffering that goes with, finding it a little better. And that's hard to quantify, folks, but I think the more you track projects out there awarded, how many change orders do you get? Do like a customer satisfaction survey of your client teams after the project is done. See what they say about that, and take that and use that to actually benchmark and talk about, what are the key things that we see here for our projects, right? All these things we can do here to actually talk about, justifying and very showing what we're bringing forward to our organizations. Great questions here, folks. Shauna, what are your suggestions for best practice on tracking and sharing vendor issues, such as withholding information or knowingly holding off on disclosing problems to secure their contract? I think biggest thing, Shauna, is just to make that shift to becoming that client of choice. And so if you go to like our Better RFPs class, we talk about that extensively. One of the things you can do is share your budget. I know it seems like a small thing to do, but sharing your budget communicates to the vendor industry that, hey, we're trying to be more open and transparent. When you have your pre-bid meetings and you talk to them about how we're going to deliver our procurements, and here's what our clarification process looks like, that's another way to actually do that. When you have your educational meetings, you're talking to the vendors, don't just go to the scope of them, but talk about this procurement is going to be different. We're actually interested in the best ways to get something done. During this partner and clarification phase, here's all the major things that we're looking to do. We want your ideas about the best way to deliver the project. So that's what I would do, Shauna, to kind of change that narrative. I would certainly track that. That'd be a great research study. Track the number of issues we find after award would be a good way to do that. You could certainly tie that into like a performance scoreboard or a KPI sort of thing. But I think the biggest thing I would do to start avoiding those issues is changing the narrative about how the vendors see us as a buyer organization. And again, I'm not suggesting you don't do that right now, but that's kind of what I've seen in the past is a great way to think about some of the stuff. Can we post the link to those classes you mentioned on BetterRP and Score and Matrix? Yes, give me a second here. If you go to Procurement U, I will post the overall link for Procurement U. And folks, you give me a second, I'll actually log into and show you the actual course registration. But if you go on there and search for Better RFPs, you should see that come up. So give me just a second, I will pull up the courses and you can get involved with that for that class. In the meantime, as I'm funding this here, any other questions or comments about the process? All right, folks, I just found the direct link. This is the direct link to the Procurement U Better RFPs Better Project class in August. So if you click on that, if you don't have a Procurement U account, you'll need to create one. It's free, and sign up for the class is also free. And be sure to check that out here. Okay, folks. Other questions? What else? Give folks a few minutes here, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Anybody having any interesting procurements coming down the line? You got a whole body of knowledge of other folks that've seen things. And pick the collective brains of everybody. You're certainly welcome to do that here.
Hi, Jake.
Hey, what's going on?
Yeah, well, hanging there, so a lot of stuff, right? So, but I get a question. So I'm trying to understand the difference between kickoff meeting and what's the final meeting you mentioned, right? So because
Yes,
just trying to, I guess we do have a bid clarification meeting right here. So before we sign a contract, we do meet with a vendor. But I'm just wondering if what's the point of having the two meetings, right, instead of one? So if you can just walk through that.
absolutely. So this kickoff meeting, the main thing we're trying to do here is, again, the vendor runs both these meetings. This is the vendor show. They're going to set the agenda. At the kickoff meeting, what the vendor's going to do is going to present their summary of what they think the project is. The vendor's going to say, here's what we think the scope is. Here's the major concerns we have. Here's the major risks we have. And they're going to go through and talk about, their current understanding of the project. As part of that kickoff meeting, or maybe, shortly thereafter, there may be other things or other concerns that you as the buyers have about the vendor's proposal or other questions that you want to clarify as part of that process. So on your evaluators, you may have, let's say 3 to 5 people that are going to be actual evaluators. You may have other people that are subject matter experts or technical people that are not a part of the evaluation process. But these people, they can be part of this kickoff meeting. It's a chance to ask all the questions you want for the vendors to go through, and they may say, you know what, we haven't considered that. Let us go back and go through that. When they go back and do that, that's what this time here is.
I
At the
see. Okay.
final meeting, it's a final summary. Here's everything you all asked about. Here's our final risk management plan. Here's the final scope. Here's the major concerns you all had. Here's our plan to deal with that. And it's just a recap of everything that's transpired. Usually on most projects, this lasts maybe 3 or 4 weeks. IT can last upwards of a month or 2 months. Solid projects can be a week, as short as a week, but in general, that's what that takes place for that.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, I know I saw Shane earlier said he has an upcoming project, so Shane, good luck with that. Using some of these best practices for clarification, so that'll be good. Absolutely. All right. Well, a couple other questions here. Crystal, how do you handle when your client is resistant to the changes we're suggesting to their scope or procurement? Oh man, Crystal. That's the question that we need to think about. Yeah. I think the biggest way we have found that is effective with that is to have almost like educational meetings with our end users. So I forget which group it was, but a couple of months ago, we had somebody that says when they have a new procurement coming on, they actually have an internal planning meeting with the end client about here's what we do as procurement. Here's our scope of work checklist that we provide as part of that RFP class. Here's our RFP template. And as procurement, we lay out, here's the top 5 things that we need you all to work on, over the next few weeks. So if you have like a strategizing session ahead of time prior to actually releasing or going forward, or even starting on the procurement process, that's a great way to kind of minimize the resistance to some of those changes. That's the first thing, is just having education. The second thing I would do is that I know this can be frustrating or challenging to do, but having some of the logic as to why we do these things and showing them that when we don't do this, here's the impact on the projects, right? So, I mean, you can even talk about an example. I mean, I don't know if they'd be interested in listening about, the example of the cyclotron or other types of projects, but the idea is that when we have issues that come up and we spend the time and effort to pre-plan it ahead of time, this is how we go forward and make sure the process is going to work well. If that doesn't work, the third thing I would say, and this is not nearly as fun, but the third thing I would say is that at the end of the day here, your role in procurement is to make sure we hire the right person. And if that means insisting on having an effective process, insisting on delaying things and make sure we have the right structure in place and following that structure, people may not be happy with you, but the outcome for the city, the outcome for the organization far outweighs any rush to procure that might be there. So hopefully it helps a little bit, Crystal, but it's not easy, but it does take time and effort. Great question. Other questions? All right, folks. Well, let me bring up the website here. We'll talk about our RFP Doctor for next month. So next month is going to be a lot of fun. So let me bring up this on the website so you all can see here. In fact, I would invite you all to invite a friend to this. So next month, RFP Doctor is going to be AI. We're going to be using AI to analyze trends and bid data. So what we're going to do for this, in fact, I'll be doing this session. What we're going to do is I have some actual procurement data, and we're going to take that and we're going to load it into ChatGPT, and we're going to show you how to analyze the data, trends, commonalities, all focus on the data side of things. Many times when we use ChatGPT, it's good for writing, it is good at asking questions, clarifying things, but its ability to do data analysis is also super impressive. And so next month in RFP Doc, we're going to do some hands-on work, go through and how to take our data, our bid tabs, and do some data analysis with that. So it should be a lot of fun. Definitely check it out. All right, folks. Take care. See y'all. Bye.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.